if you have a question, and we'll just move on. So next slide, please, Kathy. As she already read my background, so I'm a LVA 2018 graduate, happy to participate. I'm using those same slides that Kathy mentioned, just modified them a little bit. And I am a retired U.S. Army officer. Got my undergraduate degree in Cal State Sacramento and my master's degree at the University of South Florida. And just really excited for what's happening in the VA and how we can affect positive activity. So next one, please. So this is obviously your mandatory inspiring quote from George Bernard Shaw, the Irish novelist and playwright. You don't remember the game that you probably played as a kid where you'd share something on one end of the line and then with a friend and you'd watch it go down, they'd share the secret all the way down, and at the end you'd find out the message and how it got to the end, and what would the result usually be? A complete confusion about what you started with and the secret you gave and how it ended up on the other end. Things got lost in translation, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. Briefly is improving our communications efforts in order to maximize your effectiveness, mostly through written communications is how I'm talking about that. I'm not talking about your management or leadership style, but how you kind of communicate through writing. So communications is very important to interpersonal discussions, and it's how we move ideas from one person, from you, to another person, an employee of another office you're trying to interact with. And so when communications go wrong, part of the idea is lost or misunderstood by the other person, and the other person thinks they have the idea, but they don't. But the fact is, at best, it's not quite right, and at worst, it can be really tragic. We can have failure of an activity or a program or an initiative or whatever it might be. So that's what we're going to try to overcome and work through today. So next slide, we can actually skip the second inspiring quote based on time. So let's go one more. So let me allow me to lay out how we're going to do this. You know, kind of like David Letterman's top 10. I'm going to give you, that's right, 10 communications tips to hopefully make you dangerous in your role. So as the subtitle says, hopefully these will be ideas that work for you, and maybe they entertain you as well. And this perspective came about, as Kathy had mentioned, during my previous job when I was the director of congressional correspondence in VHA's Office of Community Care. We received a lot, and I mean a lot, of congressional inquiries to the tune of 4,000 inquiries a year from members of Congress who were advocating for their veteran who had a problem with VHA, Office of Community Care, or something to that effect. And so I had some novice writers who weren't writing very effectively or efficiently, and so I instituted this comms tip of the week, and this is kind of the result of that. So let's get started on a few of these. These are 10 tips. Next slide, please. So what's the joke that goes with this visual? It's obviously, why did the chicken cross the road? That's probably the way most of you would tell the joke. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side, whatever it might be. However, I submit that it's probably not the way many of you would write the joke in an email, in correspondence, in a policy, whatever it may be. The way most of you probably are writing this, and what I see across the government, is using passive voice. We write the joke as, why was the road crossed by the chicken? So I'm not trying to be your English 101 professor. I'm anything but that, but we want to get right to the point with our writing. So what's the subject of the joke? Is it the road or is it the chicken? Well, it's the chicken, of course, but we confuse our readers or our listeners when we use passive voice to tell the joke. So next slide. So tip number one is, and the reason this is the number one tip for communications is because it is one of the most common problems among federal employees, and that is for us just to say no to passive voice or passive aggressive voice. The best way to identify when you're using passive voice is for you to look for forms of to be or the past participle in your writing. Again, I'm not trying to be your English teacher from high school, but I want you to be aware of this in the way that you write emails, whatever it might be, correspondence, etc. So you can see here in the table, here are 3 examples of the same content written using passive voice on the left, active voice on the right. There are times when it's appropriate for us to use passive voice. However, rarely in government or in business writing should we be using passive voice. One of the most common kind of sentence structure problems that the government has is that the distance that we put between the subject and the verb. And this lends us to writing in passive voice rather than active voice. So we should generally write in this format: subject, verb, object. Now again, don't want to be your English teacher, but look at these 3 examples. You'll see what I'm trying to say here, where it consistently says subject, verb, object. This is the #1 way that you can improve your written communication skills and how you're talking, how you're writing to people in your areas. So the claims were reviewed by our office. Is passive voice a better way to say it? Our office did this, or our office reviewed the claims. The bottom one, the care was authorized by the VA Medical Center. Let's flip that around and just say the VAMC authorized the care. Active voice does a few things. It makes it clear who's doing the action, me, you, the VAMC in this example. It presents a more professional communication, and it's in accordance with plain language that the federal government tells us we have to do. So if you want to go to the next level, avoid passive voice in your writings and you'll be all right. Let's go on, please. All right, next tip. People who care about grammar usually care about it a lot. That's not me. I only care about it just a little, but enough to share this tip with you. And for everyone who cares about grammar, and even some of those people who don't, maybe on this phone call or this Teams meeting, there are certain misspellings or wrong usages, grammatical errors that just set their teeth on edge. You think you don't need to pay attention to this? Well, some of those people might be your boss. Maybe they're on this call right now. It might be a regional officer, a medical center director. It might be your most important stakeholder, and you're making this error continually. Most of them aren't going to correct you. They're not going to say, hey, you spelled this wrong, you did this incorrectly, but it's going to drive them crazy, and they're just going to grit their teeth and stay silent. So let's go into which some of these errors might be. Next slide, please, Kathy. All right, these are just a few examples. You probably, 3 out of 4 of them you probably have already overcome, but maybe depending on who's in the meeting today, it could be varied. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but #1, for example, it's with an apostrophe versus it's. Drives many people up the wall. It's with an apostrophe is, it's a contraction. Whereas it's equals, belonging to it or something to that effect. Using that versus who to properly say what you're trying to say. That refers to inanimate objects, usually who we want to use when we're describing people. And you can usually, just bonus tip here, you can almost always delete the word that from any of your sentences. Almost always. So when you write something, look at it, see if I can get rid of the word that. And then let's just go to the bottom, affect versus effect. Effect is a verb meaning affect with an A, meaning to change something versus using affect, meaning to make something happen. Just be aware of those kinds of things and you'll be better off. Let's go to the next one. We got 10 total. We're on #3 here. We sometimes fill our sentences with words that might be unfamiliar, they might be unnecessary, they might be too large for the occasion. This is known as gobbledygook. Now our readers, just like all of you on the phone call, on the Teams meeting today, you're all busy people, I understand that. You don't have time for wordy, hard to read documents. So words matter, but big words matter even less. And this tip is courtesy of Ron Burgundy here, you can see from Anchorman. So next week, you might find yourself at the Thanksgiving table with relatives. You're trying to impress them with your command of the English language. And that's all well and good for those kinds of reunions and family and friends. But it's not appropriate for our content with our VA offices, with our veterans, with our beneficiaries, whoever you're writing to. So when communication breakdowns happen, they can be devastating for us or for our audience. And it might be fun to tinker with words and creative slang or just show off your wonkery with jargon, but sometimes the best way to get things done is just to use straightforward, plain language. Next slide, and here's how we'll jump into this. So, good writing should never include gobbledygook. We want our writing to be as clear as possible, and so avoid gobbledygook by using specific or concrete words. So we have a little exercise we're going to do. I'm going to hold up a word, and I want you got to turn your microphones on here just for a second. See if you can find a more specific word than what I'm going to show on my screen. So instead of saying assistance, what word could we use that might be more appropriate? Help, yes, help. Very good. Let's do a couple other. We try to sound fancy and we'll use a word like advised.
Told.
Might be, huh? Told.
Said told.
There we go. Let's do a couple more. Instead of saying purchase, buy. You guys are all stars. You're getting a good grade. This is a good one for government because we all like to use this word when we're to make us sound even more official or Federal Register-ish, etc. We say pursuant
to.
Huh?
To.
Pursuant to, but another way would be maybe just say according to. I don't know, something. Pursuant's not something you're going to use it walking down the street talking to anybody. All right, last one will be done. Instead of saying
ask,
request, we can say ask. Very good. Everybody gets an A. So hey, those are just some examples we can use. You can turn your microphones back off. Ways that we can just be more engaging, avoid gobbledygook, use those concrete words when you're engaging with people. Next one. All right, I'm not a fan of weak, frail writing, and I think it should disappoint you too. If you see it, we all know when we read content that compels us to do something, wow, whether it's an article in a newspaper, a story on a blog, whatever, it compels us to do something that matters. But then we also know when we read something that just bores us to tears. I hope this tip isn't boring you to tears, but we might not know why this is happening. So we need to be able to identify those words that weaken our writing, weaken the way we're communicating with people, so that we can just stamp them out of our vocabulary. Now, you might not be the strongest person on your block, in your house, in HLTI, I don't know, but we don't want to let weak verb phrases in our writing make us look, well, weak. So I want it to be your mantra to be strong. So next slide. Our fourth comms tip is for you to be a weak verb hunter. So replace those weak words or weak phrases, I should say, with strong verbs, and you're going to be on your way to more powerful and effective writing and engagement. Instead of make a decision, which is weak, let's just use decide and sound strong. Instead of, don't write find a solution. Instead, just write solve. And there's some other examples on here. So by getting rid of those qualifiers, make a, develop a, do and, raise and, whatever, you're allowing the strong verbs to lead your communications. And note to self, excuse me, strong verbs are great for your appraisals, end of year assessments, etc. When you lead with that kind of a verb, you are demonstrating what you're able to do and that sort of thing. All right, next one. So telephone calls, Teams conferences like this haven't reduced the importance of us being good writers and how we're communicating with people around us in federal service. Between emails, reports, presentations, we're probably writing more than ever because you're at home or you're virtual or you're telework trying to communicate effectively over writing. So business writing is still important and it's very outcome driven. It exists here for these reasons: inform, persuade, report. And so for that reason, we need to be clear, accurate, specific, and then that last one is succinct, which is the one most of us have a problem with. Blaise Pascal here says, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. And so the point here is, it takes time to shorten that content down to get right to what you're trying to say. And so let's go to the next one, and I'm going to show you how to write like a boss. I want you to quit using these 10 words in most of your writing. I'm not going to go through all these. You can see them here. But if you do this, you're going to, by omitting these words, you're going to have a stronger, more persuasive professional writing. So very, let's start with that one. That's one of the easiest crutches, but it's a lame word for several reasons. It's not specific, and it makes your point subjective. Instead of saying someone is tall, or very tall, I should say they're 6 feet 8 inches. That's tall. It's wordy and it's weak, and a single powerful word could be more effective than saying, instead of saying he or she is very happy, say they're ecstatic. Use words that really kind of tell what you're what you want to get across. Let's just jump down to, based on time here, totally and completely. They're kind of go together. Like the other words, these can usually be omitted without losing any details to what you're trying to say. So either cut them out or get specific. The water was totally cold. Well, you could just, is weaker than saying the water was cold or the water was almost frozen. Get rid of those kinds of words. Let's go to the next slide. All right, always. That's rarely true, so rarely use it. Never is the same. See above. That's rarely true that something is never the case, so get rid of it. And then jumping down to maybe. Sometimes maybe is the only honest answer, the way we have to write something. However, it's a word for us to avoid when you're doing some kind of official correspondence. Not because you're supposed to know everything, but because it just sounds lazy. Try replacing it with a specific reason or a specific answer. So we're halfway through the tips. Let's move on. All right, tip number 6. Which of these two signs that you see here do you think is better? Hold your thumb up on the screen for the image on the left, and hold your thumb down if you think the image on the right is better. Let me see some. There's a down, lots of downs. All right. Yes, one of these images uses a lot of legalese on the left, and one of them uses just a few words and a nice visual. And if you're a dog owner, you know what I'm talking about. So next slide, please, I would like everybody to get more visual in their interactions. That's the point we're trying to make here. Use visuals, use a graph, use a chart, use just a compelling image to display information in a different and interesting way. Most readers are visually oriented. I gotta look at my whiteboard here. Something I wrote down the other day, 90% of information transmitted to our brain is visual. So if you can add a visual, you're going to have better absorption of what you're trying to say. Give it to them graphically rather than in paragraphs or texts. So in my expert opinion, we should use more graphs. VA is horrendous at this concept. How many things do you see where it's just tons and tons of text? Way too many words, not enough visuals to convey what we're trying to do. So I'm suggesting that you as an individual can do the same thing. Use it in your email to your 3 employees that you supervise. I don't know, whatever it might be, or from a more strategic standpoint as well. Not only do visuals help us create, that all-important white space, but they also display complex information in a clear way that we can all understand. Hopefully you can look at this chart here and see something about the purple that really stands out compared to the other shades of blue. The map of the community care network when I was in the Office of Community Care, very clear to see, all those western states in red on there. I can clearly see that instead of a listing of all those states in alphabetical order. So next slide. Here's an example of something we've used in Vision 19 to display. It's an infographic, but it's kind of an easy way. I know it's hard to see on this screen. We usually have this blown up much bigger. So don't worry about all the sites shown on the left, but hey, here's a map. Here's where locations are. Here's a picture of a syringe that's 48% full, and you can see clearly kind of absorb the information by rural, highly rural, urban, who's been vaccinated, that sort of thing. An example of things to do. It takes a lot of work, but it's worth it to get the information across. All right, next one. So we all use email, and I'm wondering what kind of closing do you use on your emails? Can a couple of people just share, what do you usually end it with? Sincerely, thanks, love?
Respectfully.
Respectfully, all right? Give me
I
one
just say
other.
thanks.
What's that?
I just use thanks.
Thanks, all right. Well, you might be on the right track, Jeannie, is that if that's who said that?
Yeah.
When you're drafting an email, ending it is the easiest part. Now, whether you sign it off with warmest regards or thanks, I use victory. That's just kind of an old Army thing that I have from a unit I was in. It only takes a second, and you probably don't give it a second thought. So, do email closings really matter? Well, yeah, guess what? They do. And if so, is best, number 7 on this chart, is that the best one? I don't know. So Boomerang, which is they're online email experts, they looked at over 350,000 emails, and this is what they discovered. Next slide. They used messages from 20 different communities and found that email closings are largely determined by the setting of an email. So again, you might end your message to your mom with love, but you would hopefully choose a more professional ending for your colleagues at work. But not much of a surprise here. These 8 closings on the left are all common email sign-offs, and the numbers don't lie here. Saying thanks or some form of thanks has proven to be one of the most effective ways to have what you're asking, the call to action in your email to your colleagues, to your coworkers, to your supervisor, to pull action out of it. So not always going to happen. I deserve a pay raise. Thanks. Signed, Lisa. That doesn't always work that way. So let's, but keep that in mind as a way in your interaction. It kind of personalizes things. All right, next one. We got 3 more to go here, rounding out some of these tips. Sometimes, when we're on the email theme, we have to write a stern email. We need to share feedback with someone who's in a different office, or we disagree with something that maybe someone has said. Maybe we need to tell an employee, you didn't really meet the expectation here that I had. While most the most benign notes may be misinterpreted, the stakes are higher when we have some critical feedback to give. So, and with an increasing number of employees working remotely, I think that probably describes HLTI. We're constantly communicating with coworkers over email, providing feedback. Even though I've done this hundreds of times, I still dread having to kind of be critical in an email to someone. So people often respond much more positively if you use this formula. Next slide, please, to kind of get things out there. So we're not going to go through all of the details here based on time, but hey, start off by saying something friendly. When you're writing the opening line, imagine it's a conversation. If someone walks up to you and just starts right into something, you might not be as inclined to be receptive to what they're saying. But if you start off with, how was your weekend, before you get into it, it might be helpful. Line number 2, or the second section, would be thank him or her for what they're doing, for the effort that they put towards this endeavor, this initiative, this project, whatever it might be. It's as easy as, thanks for your efforts on this project. Line 3, or area, point out something positive about what's going on. No one wants to feel like an idiot if you haven't met their expectations. So you don't want to beat around the bush, but you do want to take the time to kind of acknowledge what they've done. You could say something, I don't know, like, I can see where, whatever positive thing they did led to this positive kind of effect. You might tell a colleague they did a great job addressing that person's concern. And then when we get to the body of the email, get to what you're trying to say. And believe it or not, and hopefully I'm describing most of you, you would appreciate knowing why your supervisor or why this other person chose to do it differently, or why they're disappointed. You kind of want to hear it straight in that regard. So it's counterintuitive because, who really wants to hear how they messed up in detail? But we do want to show that, by sharing this, you're sharing the high opinion you may have of them, and that you're taking the time to address what's going on. So you want to avoid overly elaborating on what went wrong, and limit yourself to a few sentences that follow kind of the format of the change made and the result that you're looking for. And then lastly, end it by asking if you could clarify with or anything, or answer any questions. Let me know if I can answer any questions. It might seem obvious, but it serves a purpose. And so if you use this kind of format, you might have more success, especially in our virtual world where we're corresponding over email on so many things, and less face-to-face. All right, next one, please. We have two more. So anybody here like Baby Yoda or watch The Mandalorian? There, I got a few. Yeah, Baby Yoda, if you don't know, is a child humanoid alien of very few words. Actually, he doesn't say any words in the series The Mandalorian. So what can we learn from Baby Yoda? Well, we can learn to cut our word count down in our correspondence. Fewer words help us communicate more effectively, believe it or not. Next slide. So, here's some sentences, but you can look how these magnificently transform these sentences into works of art. So instead of saying is currently looking for, whatever the sentence might be, just say is looking for, is in the process of building out this structure, is building. We can get rid of these superfluous words and phrases. The city of New York, just say New York City or New York. There's lots of ways that we can do that. So if you can find ways to reduce or redundant words, delete them, you're going to be better off. All right, we're moving to slide number 10. Now, PowerPoint launched in 1987 when the Cutlass Supreme was a big seller. I graduated from high school in 1987. MC Hammer was beginning to move up the charts with some of his music. Turn This Mother Out was one of my favorite songs at the time. But even if you weren't around in the 80s, the odds are you might still be using some of your old school 80s presentation techniques. So I want you to check out these 4 warning signs and the tips to bring your presentations kind of back to the future, which was also released in the 80s, by the way. Number 1, saving the best for last. Don't do it. We're all short on time. We want you to get to the point and get to it fast, right up front. You've all heard of bluff, bottom line up front. Well, do it in your presentation. First slide or second slide. Here's what I'm asking, and then give the supporting evidence. Get right to the point. Decision makers like that. They want to know what's happening. Don't follow a linear path or a series of workflows to get the end result. Go right up front with it. Number 2, death by bullet points on any given slide. Offer no more than about 5 bullet points. You see, even when I had some longer slides in here, I broke it into 2, make it a little bit more easily consumable for you or to absorb the information. 5 bullet points, because it's the most any of us are going to remember anyway. And use like 6 to 8 words each. I know so often somebody will grab a Word document, cut and paste, and make that font, shrink it to fit on that slide, because I got to get it all on there. You're better than that. You can articulate things and give them some bullet points. So anyway, number 3, lazy endings. When PowerPoint first came out, presenters usually just dumped everything onto the slide, including the obligatory last slide with a giant question mark. We don't want to do that. Or thank you. Don't do that. Not only does this ending, by just throwing that, you can differentiate yourself by capturing, hey, what were the objectives that you tried to accomplish here? What was that question you asked at the very beginning or the request? You can do that. And then lastly, reading directly from your slides. Modern presenters integrate their deck smoothly and naturally into their delivery, and slides should be supporting your message, not serving as your notes page. So get your nose out of your notes and start establishing a more personal connection with your audience, whoever they may be. All right, I think we're getting to the end. Yeah, last slide. Hey, how it started, hopefully I was a little, maybe a little stiff, maybe giving you pointers, but hopefully by the end, you're a little bit more enthusiastic about maybe of those 10 tips, if there's 2 of them that you can take, something that you could adjust, hopefully you can, to make your communications more effective throughout your organization with the people you interact with across VA. Here's all my contact information. If anybody wants to touch base, I'm happy to do that. So that's all I have for you. Hopefully I finished on time. I know we were allowed to go 5 minutes over, but does anybody have any questions? Comments? Jokes?
Every time I hear you present, Jason, I get something more out of it.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. This is Brad. This second time, and each time I'm hearing it and watching it, I'm learning something new. So I appreciate it.
Hey, happy to help. All right. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your offsite, whatever the series is, the staff's gathering together, and look forward if you need any other assistance, anything else I can do, happy to help out.
Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation.
Okay. Thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thank
Jason.
you. I think we are supposed to move back over to the main classroom. Let me check real quick here. Looks like we have a tiny little break and then we go on to our next educational session. And those are listed on your Outlook calendar. You should have a calendar invite for your next session.